by stay-at-home women. It was the done thing, Dupurbela Golpo Poda. And that is how short stories have made it into the psyche of an entire generation of readers in both these languages and continue to do so. So in that sense, they do occupy a special place.
Indeed. In fact, which was the first one? Was it the Bengali one that started the series?
Yes.
So tell us a bit about how this came about.
So, without trying to flatter David R., I have no doubt that he is India's finest
He's the publisher
editor.
and editor.
Yes. Yeah. David R., who started Aleph Book Company and who started Penguin India back in the 1980s when Anandabajar Potrika was a part investor. David undoubtedly has the finest editorial mind in the country in the sense that he knows how to combine high quality with high receivability. His point is that, you can do the best work in the world, but if it is not brought out in a way that people will want to read it, there's no point in doing it. And so it was his idea. He called me one day and he said, you translate so much, but if I asked you to recommend what I should read to get an understanding of Bangla literature, assuming I know none of it, what would you suggest? And that is how the conversation began.
So in a way, you're part of the fountainhead of this whole collection.
Sort of supporting cast.
Yes. So and now how many? There is the Bengali, there's the Assamese, there's the Hindi, Kashmiri.
There's Hindi, there's Kashmiri, there's Gujarati, there's
Odia.
There's Odia, there's Telugu, which is just coming out.
And Urdu.
And Urdu. And the other languages will also be covered over the next couple of years.
Okay. So, Mitra, and this is again something you both mentioned in your very finely written forewords, that it's a difficult choice to choose from a whole, it's a whole literature in a language which is rich with stories, and it's a personal collection. So, one story, let's go into some stories. There are 25 of them, so it would be hard. Yours is a few more, I think.
21, I think.
Yours is 21 and yours is 25. And I think Poonam's was 28. So choosing these, so we'll talk about some. One which really struck me was Restless Electron, which is this amazing short story. It's written by Saurav Kumar Chaliha. And talk us through what an impact it had on the time, and also how you had to fight for it to be in the book.
Yes. Restless Electron, which is Oshanto Electron, is actually the first story which a very young Saurav Soliha wrote. That's his pen name. He's actually Medhi, but he guarded his, everybody knew who he was, but he guarded his privacy very fiercely. And he wrote this in his early 20s, and it's such a landmark. And really, this kind of story, a sudden change from what was happening before in the writing field. And he was actually, I think, in jail at that time. At least he was, under some kind of because he was protesting, and he was under some kind of surveillance, something like that. And he wrote it, and it, of course, created a huge wave because, as you said, not just the subject matter, but also it gives a picture of the times, and also the way it is written, in one after the other, different portrayals. And the other reason I wanted to, because it's very much a story of the times, and also because it has had such a huge influence on later writing. And the third reason is that, I meet people who are readers, but who come not from the so-called literature or literary tradition, doctors, scientists, social workers, and they all talk about the influence as people, that not as writers or something, but as people that this story has had on them. So I was insistent, as you said, it's a very long story, very long. It's actually, borderline novella, I would say. And so when the publishers were really very, very, very supportive. But they said, look at this story, it's about 3 times the length of the others. How can we have another? So of course Hourab Soliha has a lot of amazing stories written in his later life as well. But I said, no, I want this one. And they said, why? So I told them these reasons, and they said, okay. And even the translator, he himself said, I have some other stories, I can give you these. I said, no, I've persuaded them. He says, oh, that's congratulations. So yes, I mean, there have been many satisfying moments during this, writing this, hard work, but you know, putting this together, this was one of them.
Wonderful. So your collection, were there any hard sells? Were there any heartbreaks about leaving any story?
Yeah, there were. I mean, for every story I put in, there were two others I desperately wanted to have in there, but obviously could not. But my objective also was not to say that this is the be-all and end-all, but this is just a doorway. And the idea was that, you know, read these stories, then you'll want to read 200 more and 2,000 more. So that also allowed me to apply my choice, my taste, as it were. So I no longer felt that in the terrible burden of having to represent the best or the most important or the most influential or anything like that. I just said, look, you're stuck for an evening of storytelling with me, now you have to take what I've got. But I hope that it will be good enough to make you want to read more by these writers and by other writers as well.
So Mitra and I were discussing the title of this series, The Greatest Bengali Stories Ever Told. The greatest Assamese stories ever told. So it's almost provocative. It's like definitive and provocative and opinionated. But so what was the thought behind that?
Well, again, this was David's choice, but it is a
I
choice.
could have guessed
yeah,
that.
but it is a choice I really wish was mine. It's so good. Because my whole point is you have to provoke. You know, playing it safe and saying, here are some stories from Assamese or Bengali or Hindi, what's the point even? Okay? It makes no sense. If you say 100 years of the Assamese shots, who cares? Now, make a claim and let people come and say you're right, or they say, what were you smoking? But either way, you provoke a reaction. That's important, right? And it's not a lie, because to Mitra and to me, these are the greatest stories in our own way.
Some of the greatest.
Some of, yeah, okay, some of the
Yeah,
greatest.
some of the greatest.
Yeah.
And thank you, Arunava. I know who to blame now, because many people have been coming to me, Assamese writers, and saying, why didn't you put this? You've said greatest, but why didn't you put it? Because we all have our own choices.
Mitra, you suffer, I mean, it's your it's the unfortunate fact is that you live in Assam.
Oh.
I am fortunate in living in Delhi, so I do not have to face irate authors who ask why was my story not in there.
And why not this?
Have you faced why was my story not there?
Oh, yeah.
In a kind of a roundabout way, that especially, you know, the last, because it's about gender identity, the last story. And so there were people who said, okay, gender identity, but why didn't you put this ones? Because it was written 50 years ago. So, or whatever, 70 years ago. I said, no, it's also a question of how it's written. This one is beautifully written. So,
Yeah, that brings me to the other topic that, you know, I noticed that across the stories that there are various topics where gender issues, rural problems, historical, you know, there's one story where The Offering, which is in Arunabo's collection, which talks about the depredations of the zamindari system, and yes, so it covers a lot of ground. There's humor. There is the first story itself, Patmogi. It has this. It's an amazing story, and you told me it's written many, many years ago.
it's written over a century ago by a man. And it is a completely feminist story. Lokinath Bezbora in Assamese is known as the father of the Assamese short story. And his stories, he has a huge, because he was also, besides being a businessman, he was also the editor of a very well-known journal, Mahi. So he had to produce stories, he had to, get authors to, and he has a wealth of stories, but this one has always been, it stayed with me, Patmogi, because it's such a contemporary story. And it's written from the point of view, the sexuality of a woman, the response of a man as a gender, it's a generic thing. That it's amazing that he could actually write about this and it's amazing that the society in which he lived at that time actually accepted this story as one of the greats. So for me, this has been, Patmugi has been, the first choice in any selection of this kind.
Yeah, it's like a Bradman in a greatest ever cricket 11.
Right.
So, just staying with that story, what was very clever, I guess part of the reason why everyone had to accept it is that ironical letter the editor writes
Yes,
back.
yes,
So the story
yes,
ends with that, which
yes.
is so clever. It almost kind of
It's
makes
kind
it
of a box
impossible.
within a box,
Yes.
yes. And he's already preempted
Absolutely.
criticisms.
So I thought that was very smart for someone writing so many decades ago. In your collection, the one story which I had read in Bangla and I completely love because I'm an event organizer is Indubala, Einstein and Indubala. So can you talk us through, because Bibhuti Bhushan is known for Pother Panchali and his very beautiful depiction of rural life in Bengal. So the stories that we hear from Bibhuti Bhushan are, there's a sense of poignance and, it's a tender kind of story, but this is riveting in a different way. It also ends with a newspaper report like Patmugi.
Yeah, so, there were some writers who had to be present in the anthology. So the question was which story of theirs to go with. And while you could go with one, as with Rabindranath, for example, we went with Kabuliwala, although it is perhaps his best known story, but maybe because of that very reason, that you can't quite leave out a story as iconic as that one. But with Bibhuti Bhushan, we were fortunate in that his novels are the iconic ones. So you could pick one of the short stories. And I really wanted to pick something with a different mood, which shows that Bibhuti Bhushan was capable of writing brilliantly in a across a wide range. And this one is so funny and at the same time so sharp. And then it was a toss-up in my mind between this and another story he wrote about a queer with a queer character at its, and both are unlikely in that sense. They both break the mold of what Bibhuti Bhushan you expect from Bibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay, right? But eventually I went with this one.
So picking two of the same author was just not going to cut it.
No, yeah. So in fact, I keep telling David, the time has come for yet more of the greatest.
Those weren't the only greatest ones, these two, yes. So for you, there are a couple of stories with humor as well. So was it important to get different flavors of Assam?
See, all of these, because it's an arc, right till contemporary times, till over more than 100 years ago, as it is in your case as well. So, and of course, these are stories that have been very, very popular, and they have spoken to me. That's the main thing, that they have, and we have discussed this in many ways, at home and while talking of literature and so on. So yes, the flavors, because there are some that are, as you know, about 20 years or so ago, there was a lot of, violence, insurgency, and so on. So there have been fantastic stories written about, during those times. But I did not want to settle only on those. Because, okay, that is one, violence and, bloodshed and grief and all. That is, of course, very important part of what we have gone through. But there is also this other side, such as Close of Day with Miss Havisham, where the writer talks about a woman with very, very severe OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and what happens to her, she just falls apart when her husband, who used to take care of her, just comes. So, and it's so tenderly written, it's so delicately written. For me, it was a beautiful story, and it had, so, and I wanted to put in different flavors of life, different aspects of life, as it is in Assam, or as it was in Assam. So this was one story that I felt I had to put, because it's so different from, what you may expect.
So coming back to the selection, each of you had your own challenges. In Poonam's essay before her collection, she confronts the question, is Hindi literature Hindu literature? And she, talks about how with the presence of Urdu literature and many stories not having characters of a diverse milieu. This is a question that, one should regard with some attention. In your case, the question was whether you include Bangladeshi authors as well. So was that a temptation, or did you just decide to stick to West Bengal and the authors? Of course, there are a couple who are before partition. So.
No, so it was definitely under consideration, but we felt that we wouldn't be able to do justice to either geography if we ended up matching. Then we'd have to do 50 stories. And then the publisher said we'll do a separate collection of stories from Bangladesh. And also I felt that ideally that selection should come from somebody who is there and lives amidst that literature and so on. So it wouldn't be fair to sit here and make that choice. But we also had the problem of Bangla literature being very Kolkata-centric up until recently, when voices from other parts of the state are being published and are being read. But I also didn't want to go too contemporary with my selection, because I felt that the stories need a certain space in terms of time to be acknowledged as one.
Which is the newest story?
The newest story is Amar Mitra's story, and even that is almost 20 years old. And that one also I chose because there was a certain classical ring to it. It was the story I think that Philip Henchard loved very much. So yeah, my point also was that, give it a little bit of distance, because sometimes stories appear great in the here and now, but in some strange ways they date afterwards. In fact, interestingly, Jhumpa Lahiri, who edited the Italian book of short stories for Penguin, has chosen only dead authors. She made it very clear that I'm not going to include anyone who's still living, because at least you can come to a definitive judgment about people whose writing lives are over.
As an author, that must be slightly a sobering thought for you.
I don't know. Maybe I'll become dead if somebody wants to include me. Otherwise, they won't. But if I could add, are you done? Yeah. If I could add to that, in my case, the problem was, see, we have many languages.
I was going to ask you. You wrote that in your preface, that there are many languages in Assam. I'm speaking about the Assamese.
Yes. Of course, as soon as, and I knew this would be an issue because it is a contentious issue. So why only Assamese stories? Why not Boro? Why not Mishing? Why not so much? And that's valid. So immediately I said, no, these are Assamese, and then I have addressed this in the, and hopefully there will be, anthologies coming forth about these other stories, Boro stories, and so on. But the other thing is that we have a very rich oral tradition, which is still very vibrant. And for me, there's no hierarchy as such, that written is higher or oral is higher. No, they are parallel. And they sometimes switch over from one to the other, or it's a fluidity. So for me, I wanted to include some oral stories as well, oral narrations, which have been happening. But I think it wasn't possible, because then there are multiple translations, oral to written, Assamese, then written to English. So that was, maybe somebody will do it at another point of time. And the third thing is that, as you know, Assam was a large geographical entity at one point, and then there were different states. So in places such as, for instance, Nagaland or Arunachal, in Arunachal, Assamese was the medium of instruction was Assamese. So the older writers were writing and are still writing in Assamese. But the younger readers and writers are writing in Hindi and English. Mamang Dai, for instance, she's writing in English. But I wanted to include that Assamese as well, and I have Yeshi Dorji Thongchi, which is, he wrote in Assamese, and it's been translated here into English, but it's Assamese of Arunachal. So that was important to me, whereas you have not done the Bangladesh.
Nor for that matter, stories written in Bangla from the northeastern states.
Silchar, for instance,
which I want to do a separate anthology, because I read some and I felt that the concerns were so unique that to take one or two stories, they'd be lost in this whole thing. So it would be better to give them the kind of space that they deserve. But can you imagine Poonam's task? Can you imagine Poonam's task? I mean, she's
Oh, yeah,
dealing.
Hindi.
Hindi is spoken, written in everywhere from the eastern border of Bihar to the western border of Rajasthan, and with Madhya Pradesh in between, and so on. And so many
And
flavors and
pre-partition
versions.
right up
And
to...
pre-partition, and
Yes.
as you said, Hindustani. You didn't even have a divide between Hindi and Urdu at that point. So,
No, we are missing her today. Hopefully next year we shall revisit some form of this session. So you were talking about, concerns. This struck me about many of the stories in Assamese. There are two things, the two diverse concerns which mark both your anthologies. I'll start with Mitra. Is the presence of nature and, living in nature, which keeps recurring in many stories, story after story. So, is that the ethos of the writing of Assamese books? We get a flavor of it in your book as well as in Mamangdai's writings at times. But in Assamese, somehow it seems
Very
a
strong.
very, very strong presence.
Yes, actually, I think this is because urbanization has come later to Assam. I mean, the small town figures very largely, but like you have the Kolkata stories and all. Now we are beginning to have Guwahati stories or diaspora stories and so on. But even because the river, especially Brahmaputra, is such a strong presence and you cannot escape it. And I think I've written here, it's a character in so many of these stories. I mean, without it, the story would not move forward. So nature in that way definitely is there, and also nature in the form of, flowers and greenery and plants and so on. And regeneration, the idea of regeneration comes from nature also. So yes, it is very much, nature is very much a part of these stories. And it could also be that, because these are personal, very subjective. So these are the stories because of their wealth of natural descriptions have appealed to me, maybe. It could be
I
that.
mean, there are also characters in the story, like the story about by Birendra Bhattacharya in the wife.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, that's a multi-layered story, because of course the Brahmaputra, without it the story would not move forward, where all that action is happening there. But it is also a commentary, because this is an author. The character in the story is an author who is waiting for his first book. Yeah, it's waiting for for the first copies of his book that's coming. And in the meantime, a storm comes and upsets a boat in which his wife is also coming. And then there are people, loaders, who are loading paper. Okay, so it's this layer. I mean, it's the writer is the mind, but without the loader of the paper, who ultimately goes into the river to save the writer's wife. I mean, he would be nothing without this subaltern, you can say, person who is actually rescuing the wife, who is his muse, and also getting the paper out. So I mean, all these layers, they fascinated me. And of course, the power of the river, which is just upsetting everything all around. So that, of course, is Mia Mansoor. And also the Mia Mansoor, also, the religion, and he goes off to Pakistan later on. So
Yeah, I think it's the second story in your collection.
third or something,
yes,
yeah.
Agoni and that. And in your collection, Bengalis are always accused of wistfulness and a very, very deep inner life. And so that keeps recurring in different ways. Even in a Kabuliwala, in Jalsha Ghor, in the story I mentioned earlier. And there are, of course, stories like the Naubarun story, which is very different. But this wistfulness is a theme that I saw across the stories I read. So are you wistful, or is the collection wistful because of you?
No, you can't escape it. It's when you read, and as you're reading a vast number. And by the way, I must tell you that these stories actually were not translated for this anthology, most of them. I kept translating these stories over a long period of time, just because I thought they were good stories, and I did them as riyaz for myself. And so when the idea came up, I already had about 60% of the collection ready. So, and yeah, I mean, to some extent, maybe it speaks to something in me. but I don't think it's atypical. Far from it. So the Bengali ethos of Pelamna, there's something that should have been mine, but not in some kind of not in the sense of being presumptuous about it or appropriating it, but simply that as a human being I'm capable of greater things perhaps, and the world is not conducive to helping us humans achieve what we are capable of achieving. So I think this anxiety, this tension.
Yes, that's the word I'm looking for.
Yes.
There's an anxiety.
Yeah. And initially it's wistfulness. As you see later on, as we come closer to contemporary times, it turns into more of anger and more of revolutionary zeal. So by the time we're looking at Mahashweta Devi's story and then her son Nobadun Bhattacharya's story, we're seeing it clearly in the form of class conflict that has political, or Udan Ghosh's story, you're seeing class conflict, political conflict. That is the manifestation. But it is still this yearning for some kind of perfection, both at the individual level and at the level of society and groups and society, that informs, I think, almost every Bangla piece of literature that you read.
Yes, it's pretty all pervasive here. So now this is something which will of course continue from LF. But if both of you had to choose another, another collection of Assamese literary works, would you think the natural second choice would be poetry?
Actually, poetry does need to be done. Definitely needs to be done in all languages, but not by me, thank you.
Yes, it is a bit of a very injurious
unfortunately,
fear to
I will
tread
read.
Fool's Russian.
So, I can't give away too much, but you can imagine that David is not sitting by with only a string of greatest short stories. He's also plotting other things, other ways in which to bring literatures together. And so we are looking at a wider range of forms, not just poetry or not just fiction, but all the forms in a way that tells a story eventually. So that is much trickier, because now you're talking about trying to form a narrative through, but I'm sure that's the case with Ohmiya literature as well. In Bangla, certainly there is a wealth of writing in the form of poetry, certainly, but also a great deal of drama, history, philosophy.
Yeah, drama
mythology.
too would be a good.
Yeah.
I was just going to say theatre, and many of these authors that are here, they have been excellent. Bhabendranath Khoikia is a filmmaker, and he has been, because we have a lot of mobile theatre activism was going on, and he's written extensively for that. So theatre is definitely something that should actually, in fact, long ago there was a Katha series on, in which there was theatre of various groups from India's Northeast India. Yeah.
So yes, we are, I'll just throw it open to the audience after just one quick question to you both, which is not to do with your collections. If you had to pick one other language you would like to read a collection from, which would it be?
Japanese.
Okay, that's superbly diplomatic. And
No, really. But you mean Indian language?
Yeah, I meant Indian language.
Actually, all. That's also diplomatic.
Are you going to surprise me by being a bit?
Yeah, no, I'll be forthcoming, and it's the language that I think is the strongest literature in India right now. It's a force of nature, and it is head and shoulders above all the other languages. That's Malayalam, which you can claim part ownership of. Yeah, Mala is half Malayali.
I'm fully Malayali.
Because now that you've been in Calcutta all your life, I think you'll have to give up 50% of it, which is fully Malayali.
But I have no role to play in the wonderfulness of their literature.
She's Banglayali. But but it's a force of nature. Malayali literature is fantastic. And you know what it shows is that if you have a culture of education, then you're going to get the finest art. And that is, I think, something that Kerala shows us all the time.
Yes, there's also a big resurgence of their cinema, and a lot
Music,
of pan-India
cinema.
is being watched thanks to the web
Exactly.
OTT platforms.
Exactly. It's fantastic. It's world class.
Excellent. Is there a Malayalam? I would imagine there's a greatest
I'm sure
Malayalam.
it's in the works.
It's in the works.
Bound to be.
Okay, so now we'd like to throw the, there are quite a few hands going up. Right in the middle. In the
Yeah.
middle, yes, you've got the mic as well.
Yeah.
Well done.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is taking the thread of one earlier discussion in the same stage. That's the use of the language in smartphones. Now, also this may be slightly irrelevant because your all stories you have selected is 20 years before or something. I want to ask one question. The present day short story literature all over, is it undergoing some change because of this smartphone lingo? I mean, the writing style of it.
Mitra, would you like to take that?
It's definitely undergoing changes. It has always undergone changes. Today it's going very fast because you have these very short stories, not necessarily in the smartphone lingo, but I think accommodating that space in the smartphone, and yet they're very concise, and yet they tell a story. So that way, yes. And of course, I think I've come across many stories where the dialogue is in smartphone lingo, and it's given as smartphone lingo. So I don't know if it'll take over.
Is this in Assamese or generally you've read stories?
I think generally, because you see, I don't know, even well-versed Assamese writers tell me that the keyboard is very difficult on the phone, the Assamese. I don't know about Bangla. Yeah, so that way. But yes, definitely, and I think in due course, it may happen because language also undergoes a change all the time, so it may happen.
So is it a sad story or a good story, the change?
Are you sad?
No.
Are you sad?
No, I'm not sad at all. Language needs to evolve, and language
Yeah.
has to evolve to keep pace with newer realities. Language expands to accommodate realities that older versions of the language could not accommodate. But some changes are transient. They stay for a while, then they go away. Some remain. So we will know. But I think it's more a generation change than a smartphone change, because older people will still use smartphones to type out full sentences with punctuation marks. I'm told, I teach at a university, and I'm told by my 18 and 19-year-old students that if I text them with a full stop at the end, then it induces high anxiety and tension, right? No, you cannot use a full stop at the end. Okay, you cannot use a smiley, and there are lots of rules. Now, my point is, I love these things because this is a new language which I'm also learning. But whether I'll need to learn it for the rest of my life, I don't know. Maybe it'll go away in another 2 or 3 years. Who knows?
Yes, certainly.
Yes, the other thing I think that's likely to take place is that language is becoming much more visual because of the smartphone and the emojis and the smileys. And I myself, instead of writing out a long and grammatically correct sentence which says that this makes me really very happy, I just do a smiley.
Yeah.
So there's
Which is
this-
extremely hostile, by the way. If you just send a smiley and nothing else, it's like fully hostile. Because you're basically saying, I hate what you're saying, and I'm just giving
I'm
you
sorry,
this.
I've been doing that all my life.
No, don't do
I mean, not my life.
If you've done it to 18-year-olds,
They are worried.
No.
they're very worried.
So
Thank you, thank
I
you.
wanted to also add, if I may, a novel which I really loved recently. It's by this Irish author called Sally Rooney. It's called Conversations with Friends. And it has a lot of the action is through emails and through SMSs. And the action is carried forward actually in a very natural and utterly brilliant way. The story goes forward. The relationships are forged and broken through these messages. And for me as a reader, I don't write, but as a reader, I am a little amazed that we don't see more of that, because that is truly how we are communicating. The first traces of those are there in cinema. Even commercial cinema like Crazy Rich Asians or the recently released Gehraiya had WhatsApp chats playing very major roles in the progress of the story. So I think proper literary novels, Rooney's was a proper literary novel, this will make its way. So there is no way we can feel sad. We just have to sigh and embrace it, sir.
Yeah, in fact, it's not even a choice. When young people, I teach creative writing, and young people write their fiction very naturally when dialogue takes place over text, because they also hate talking. They will not call one another, they will text compulsively. So important exchanges are taking place over text, and it is taking place in the natural language of text messages. And there's nothing, I mean, they're not even stopping to think about it. That's natural. So
There was another question. There's a lady, yes, sir.
I would like to, Mitra, I think, huh?
Yeah.
I wholly agree with this concept that you gave, that the Brahmaputra controls Assam, you know, the character of Assam and all the stories and all. That's just a comment. But what I would like to know from both of you all is that when you're translating a short story, what is the methodology you use? I mean, do you just read the story and then translate the essence of it and then go back and check? Or do you do it piece by piece? I mean, which method would you find more conducive to a better translation?
Can Arunava answer this one? Yes.
no, you have to, you're translating a text, you're not translating the essence or anything like that. In fact, I personally am very opposed to the idea of the essence of a work of literature, because then you're reducing all the wealth and richness and multiplicity of interpretation into one thing, saying this is the only thing that this text is, which is, to my mind, wrong. So you go literally at the sentence level, sometimes even at the word level. That does not mean you're just substituting each word or phrase with its dictionary equivalent in the other language, because you are not only reading with your eyes, but you're reading with your ears. You're listening to how it's going. You're listening to the music. You're listening to the cadence, the flow. You're listening to the silences. You're listening to what is said and what is not said, but what is implied. You're listening to ambiguities. You're listening to not just direct statements, but also hints. And all of these things need to be preserved in your translation. You cannot interpret. You cannot say, this is what I think this story means, and therefore here's the meaning. No, you must allow your reader to interpret it in as many different ways as possible in the translated version as in the original version. Okay. So it's a very granular kind of translation.
Oh.
At least that's what I do.
Okay, thanks a lot. But there's one more question. When you're talking about, you hear the silences and the implications, most of the stories, or many of the stories that you all are translating, are from eras gone by. And whatever perceptions come from those stories are of that era. And you are translating in the present at that time. So did you all have, or what kind of difficulties do you face when you want to carry that perception from that time into the present when you are translating it? You want to tell the story and you want to preserve the social atmosphere of that story at that time.
Yeah, my stories are from over 100 years old to very contemporary times. And it's not just a question of older stories having, things that I do not agree with, about maybe the social milieu or the way the character reacts. There are also newer stories in which I don't really agree. So, I mean, there's no question of changing anything, but I think the reason these stories have been chosen is that they speak to us in some way, okay? So basically, I do not have, for instance, this story, Agoni Bai, it's about how a woman living about, I think, 70 or 80 years ago was treated. In fact, several of the stories, what happens is that the breadwinner goes, and how society treats the woman and how they confront that. Even that very powerful story, Values, by Indira Goswami, how the woman confronts society, okay? So some I don't agree with, some I agree with, but I think these stories spoke to me as a woman, as a reader, as somebody from Assam, living in that atmosphere where it may have been written 70 years ago, but in some pockets of Assam, rural Assam, very interior Assam, they still exist. So,
Ma'am, can we, yeah, thank you. So is there any other question? There's one right in front. I think that would have to be the last one.
Good evening. You're from such a far off places. So I've been to Assam and I have known some people like Urvasi Butalia and Indra Goswami also. And when you talked about Malayali, there are some very nice things that I have read, like Tagadi Sivsankar Pillai's works. So that is through Sahitya Academy. I'm not a Malayali reader actually, not a Bengali reader, but I appreciate whatever Sunil Gangopadhyay writes because of some translations. So would you suggest that there should be there should be a collection which should be brought by this Sahitya Academy or any other publication, maybe some, because everything is going private. So maybe all the classics can be collected somewhere, like Usne Kaha Tha from Hindi.
That is part of Poonam's collection. In fact, it starts with Usne Kaha Tha.
Okay, okay. I've not seen the book, that's why. Thank you very much.
If you read these collections, I don't think you'll be disappointed in the way they bring the literatures of each of these languages.
No, I have been through only Sahitya Academy, that's why. I have not seen your book, that's why. Sorry.
But you know, Sir's question does merit a quick comment that these are wonderful endeavors, but what about tying up with Sahitya Academy, which is eminently well placed for more, energetic translation work? Is it ever a thought?
Well, translation is getting more and more vibrant in terms of both depth and width. And I'm not sure that Sahitya Academy has to be in the mix, because Sahitya Academy is at the end of the day not equipped with great editorial capacities.
So collaborations, you know.
Yeah, but frankly it's happening. I mean, publishers are working on it, and here's a chance to talk about something then, that at Ashoka University where I teach, we've just set up the Ashoka Center for Translation, where it is going to be our endeavor to unlock literatures from different languages and have them translated, not just into English, but into other Indian languages as well, so that they can be read in multiple languages, not just in English alone.
One thing I would like to add to Madam's query, which Madam asked, that translation cannot be perfect. Something is lost in translation, everybody says. So, but it can, practice makes perfect. Sometimes the translations can come up very beautifully. Like Premchand's son, he has translated some Russian works, named in Hindi Agni Diksha, and I found it very appropriate, very nice, up to kind of Russian ethos. So I hope that more translations happen, the translation will be near to perfection, I think.
Thank you, sir.
So what is your favorite Russian novel?
Sir, Maxim Gorky,
Mother.
Which language have you read it in?
Hindi only.
Do you consider it imperfect?
No, but
I'm just asking you, when you read it, did you think this is imperfect?
No, I consider this, his name is some Rai, Premchand's son. His translation.
I think you're talking about Premchand's grandson, actually, if I'm not
Yes, but
wrong.
this translation of Gorky's Mother in Hindi, did you consider it an imperfect work?
No, but I consider Agni Diksha more near to Russian ethos, the kind of struggle which made Russia.
Okay. So you found perfection in translation, that's fine then.
Means close to, I have also translated some poems and all, that's why.
Do you read Russian?
No, Russian, but I have been to JNU, sir. Many of my
friends. You don't have a choice, you have to read translation.
Yeah, many friends are there in JNU who...
I would think upon reading translations as being found in translation, because those literatures you would never find otherwise. None of us would.
More translations I welcome, that is the thing.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think that's a great point to round up on. And translations, we have to remember that some of the stories we love from across the world and which we consider our own, whether it's from Russia, whether it's Marquez, we're actually reading in translation. So they are, as I said, they are the alchemists. They are keeping gold as gold, but showing it to you in a form that you can recognize. So thank you, Mitra. Thank you, Arunava. It's just wonderful to have the two of you. And I hope next year, if you're back, we'll get two other Greatest Stories collections and Poonam to be with them. Thank you for this session. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been wonderful. Thank you.